All right, well, thanks, Mick. I appreciate that. I tell you guys, it is great to be here at Tasktop Connect 2.0. I think that's really cool. So happy to be here. It's very exciting. We live in a time of amazing technological connectedness. Oh yeah, forgot my clicker. That'll be helpful, won't it? Does this go forward and backward? Or just forward?
I gotta go forward.
Okay, well, hopefully I won't have to go back.
It's two buttons.
It's two buttons, all right. We live in a time of amazing technological connectedness, but I tell you, it is such a privilege to be able to come together to a venue like this and network face-to-face and have some human interaction. It is so cool. It kind of reminds me a lot of that business result of happiness, right? When I saw that, I thought, yes! Something in the software delivery that focuses on the happiness of the developer. That's exciting. I was very excited to see that. Kind of gets back to that human element. So sometimes it feels like that can get a little bit lost. So a little background on me, 25 years in IT, working for a couple of financial services organizations. Quite a bit of that time spent with as an HP, then Micro Focus, Quality Center, then ALM administrator, and then of course more recently as a Tasktop administrator. First with Tasktop Sync, and now with Tasktop Hub, which is really why I'm here today to talk a little bit about TIAA's journey from Sync to Hub. And I also really like to take vendor products and do some extra kind of techie things with them, go a little bit deep. Anything I can get my hands on, APIs or databases. Yes, I do get into the database and I mess with their JSON code in there to take integration information and extract it from test and promote that into production. Don't necessarily recommend you go to that level, but if you are interested, it can be done because I've done it, and I actually kind of like the challenge of doing those kinds of things. So, but all that to say that this presentation is going to go a little more into the technical, just like what Jeff's presentation was. So we're going to go a little bit deep, so be prepared or be warned, either way. What a difference a year makes, right? So if you were at last year's Tasktop Connect, then you might remember I came up and I gave a presentation on Tasktop Sync. And at the time I felt, well, a little behind the game, a little behind the times maybe, because all the focus on last year's conference, just as this one, was all on Tasktop Hub. And so I felt a little like, should I even be talking about Tasktop Sync? And Mick said, oh yeah, you guys are using Sync, other people are using Sync. Come up and talk about Sync. And that way you can come back next year and you can talk about your journey from Sync to Hub, right? And I thought, oh, okay, but here I am doing that very same thing. He called it. So, but I got to admit, when I first took a look at Hub, which was a year prior to last year's conference, it looked nice, but yeah, I wasn't all that motivated necessarily to move to it. After all, I've got a developer background, very comfortable with Eclipse. We'd been using Sync for years. It was working just fine for us. It's kind of a, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right, kind of mentality. But when I attended last year's conference and looked at really how much Hub had improved in what was really a pretty short amount of time, and I looked at several of the features that had been introduced into it, I said, yeah, I'm going to go back and I'm going to take a look and we're going to give it another look and see where we are with that. I did that, we evaluated, and we said, yeah, it's time a year ago to move from Sync to Hub. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that journey, some of the whys, some of the things that we saw in Hub that said, yep, definitely time to move. And more importantly, I'll talk a little bit about some of the hows, kind of how we took some of those integrations from Sync and brought them over into Hub. And then I'll go a little bit deeper, a little bit into the technical, have a slide with some code on it. I always like to see a presentation with a slide with code. It always warms my heart. So I appreciate that Jeff had some on there. I really liked seeing that. I'll talk a little bit about extensions, what those are, and some of the ways that you can leverage those, maybe some things that you hadn't thought about. Go a little bit into the Hub Error API and some things that we're doing with there, some interesting things. And then also want to touch on automated testing of our integration, some thoughts that we have there as well. So where's TIAA with Tasktop today? Well, prior to this year and for the years before that, as I mentioned, we were using Tasktop Sync, 6 production instances running on 2 different sync servers to kind of distribute the load, and as you can see, a handful of SDLC tools. Now fast forward to today, and we're running all on Tasktop Hub with 6 production integrations that are a little bit different than the ones that we had on Sync that I'll talk about, on one hub server. So that was nice. We were able to consolidate our server footprint. Well, with the exception of one Sync server, I do still have one integration that's running on Tasktop Sync. It's a very low priority, low volume, low maintenance one, and I just haven't had time to move it. So we do have a straggler. I got to get back to Charlotte and get that moved over. That's, I think, my next priority. But as you can see, we've got different SDLC tools now. And the thing that I really want to point out, and what Mick told me to make sure I mention, is disruption, right? We all face disruption. We all face change. You don't know when you're going to come to work and they're going to say, we're taking one tool out and we're putting another tool in. Or we're acquiring a company and now we've got different teams that are working in different locations. They need to work together, and maybe they can move to the same tool, but maybe they can't. Maybe there's technological reasons, or maybe there's political reasons, and we can't do that. So how do you mitigate that change? How do you manage? And that's really what attracted us originally to the Tasktop products. Whether it's Sync or whether it's Hub, the Tasktop products really smooth out the wrinkles from those disruptions. So you can take tools, you can drop tools, bring in tools, but when you've got Hub is connecting everything together, you can do that. You can weather that disruption by just plugging in other tools into your integrations. And that really, really helps with that disruption, really manages it, makes that quite nice. So for example, this is a slide that I actually had last year, but you'll notice that if you were here last year and you remember, I had RTC at the top, right? Because in our organization, we said RTC is out, we're getting rid of it, we're going all in Jira. We had an integration, it's one of my favorite integrations, that's why I talked about it, and that's why I brought it back, between ALM and RTC. Well, RTC is out, Jira's in, we said, no, that's no problem. Tasktop Hub can integrate with Jira just as well as RTC, in fact, maybe even a little bit better. And we can just go ahead and take that integration that was between ALM and RTC. We can move it right to ALM Jira. Not a problem. Life goes on. Everything, all the benefits that we were getting, no problem. Everything keeps flowing right along. So, and this is one of my favorites because it's actually 2 integrations. So we take Jira stories and we synchronize those into ALM requirements. And when we do that, we bring the Jira story ID into that ALM requirement. Then as QA assigns the requirement to an ALM test case, has that coverage by that ALM test case, we bring again that Jira story ID right into the ALM test case. We also bring test case coverage back to the Jira story so they get that test case coverage and execution information. As QA executes the test cases, if there's an issue, then they can create an ALM defect from that. And again, that Jira story comes right into the defect. That triggers an automatic creation of a Jira bug. Again, story IDs flowing through, which triggers an automatic link of that Jira bug right back to that Jira story. So we get that full traceability from Jira into ALM right back into Jira. And that's been a great integration that's done a whole lot for us. And again, we could pull out one tool, stick in another, and everything just keeps on moving along. Another example of disruption is with acquisitions, right? So TIAA acquired a company called MyVest. They had 2 teams. They had a team in TIAA, they had a team in MyVest. They were going to merge them all onto one tool. That was the plan. That plan fell through. I think it was partly technical, maybe it was a little political, but they weren't able to get these 2 teams into one tool. And they were they had like a couple of months where they had to come up with a solution, and they were getting into a little bit of a panic. We got wind of that and said, oh yeah, no problem. Tasktop Hub can integrate between SharePoint, which TIAA was using, and Jira, which MyVest was using. We said we can set up a Tasktop Hub integration on that. You can create your artifacts in either endpoint. It'll create right back in the other endpoint. It'll synchronize all the updates in near real time. Everything's going to be great. They were blown away. They thought, wow, this is terrific. This is exactly what we needed. The only thing that was missing was the connector at the time couldn't synchronize the SharePoint attachments. Talked to Tasktop support. Hey guys, we got a potential issue here. They got right on it. Said, yeah, we'll take a look at it. So got the connector updated so that it could synchronize the attachments. So big shout out to Tasktop support for helping us with that, and of course the engineers who actually did the work. Big shout out to them, but they've been great team to work with. And yeah, so just huge benefits there. So where are we today? You can see I threw up some numbers. It's kind of nice to look at those numbers once in a while. In my day-to-day, I don't really focus on that. I kind of focus on a variety of things. And Tasktop Hub, for the most part, those tools sit in the kind of in the background, right? And they do all the work. So it's nice to once in a while look at your numbers and go, wow, this really is doing a lot of work. I mean, if Hub's doing what it should just be kind of quiet, sitting in the background and working away. And when you look at your average creations and updates and you go, wow, we are really getting a lot of value out of that. So it's good to, from time to time, look at those metrics and see that information. So as you can see, that ALM defect, Jira bugs, it's one of our heavy hitters, along with then the stories going back into the ALM requirements. And then we've got a couple of other ones. I talked about the SharePoint to MyVest. We've got another ServiceNow to MyVest, very similar one. And then we've got a couple of new ones that are actual replacements of our Tasktop Sync integrations that we're moving. I thought I'd have them moved by now, but kind of due to some service constraints, we had to back that off. It's actually going to be into next year. So why did we move? Why did I come into the conference last year all pro Sync and now I'm all pro Hub? Well, here's really some of the big reasons as I started to take a look at it and say, and really dig a little bit deeper into Hub again. These are the thoughts that came to my head as far as, yeah, this is why it's time to move. And I'm going to talk about scripting a little more, filtering, models, and I'm going to talk about the integration landscape. So one of the big reasons that we moved is simplicity. With Tasktop Sync, if you've seen that tool, it's all based on Eclipse, which for me, I can go in and I can look at it and things make sense. But to an average person, might not be quite as intuitive. You can look at the Tasktop Hub integration dashboard, and this is easy to figure out, right? You don't need a degree in computer science to figure out what's going on here. It's very simple. It's very laid out in a very nice and easy way. So that's simplicity. And what follows along with that is support. We found with Tasktop Sync, I was really the only one supporting it. And it was a little bit more challenging to bring other people on the team into a position where they could support our Tasktop Sync integrations. With Hub, very easy to support. We've got other people on the team now. They can log in. They can fix any kind of sync issue, errors. My manager, who doesn't have a developer background, he was able to go into Hub and start creating his own integration without any assistance from me or really any material at all. It's that intuitive. So just having that support, and that allows us to respond quicker to issues. It lets me take a vacation without having to bring my laptop, right? So I don't have to worry about it because these guys can log in and they can fix these things as well. So support, huge. Filters is another thing. That's probably one of the biggest things that I got out of last year. When they said that Tasktop Integration Hub did its own artifact filtering, that was like a light bulb. That was huge for me. I found with Tasktop Sync, when you integrate from endpoint to endpoint, you have to know how each endpoint does its own filtering or reporting. It kind of varies by tool. But obviously, when you're doing an integration, you don't want to take all the artifacts from one tool and move them. You got to subset that somehow. So you have to do some type of a filter or something in that endpoint to identify exactly what you want to synchronize. Well, with sync, you had to learn that tool's mechanism. And if you didn't know that tool, you had to work with their SME, and you had to have a little conversation, and sometimes that could be a little bit challenging to figure out exactly, communicate exactly what you wanted. With Hub, all that filtering is done within the tool itself, which is huge. It's simple, it's easy, and it works wonderfully well. And it actually simplifies integrations. We had a Tasktop sync integration that was, we were integrating between ServiceNow and ALM. And the team said, if a problem ticket is created with any of these 150 applications, is assigned to any of these 150 applications, we want that to create a defect in ALM so that we can tie that into our test coverage. Okay, I don't know if you've ever tried to create a ServiceNow filter with 150 or statements. I'm getting a lot of feedback here on this, sorry. 150 statements, but you can't do it. It kind of chokes up after about 35. So I had to create 6 different ServiceNow filters and do 6 different Tasktop sync integrations just to meet that requirement. With Hub, you can do all 150 ORs in one Tasktop Hub artifact filter. And I'm told you can do even more than that. I think David King said he tested it with over 300, so that was good to know. I had plenty of room to grow there if I needed to. Now sometimes it might still, with Hub you can still do a specific tool filter. And I do that with ALM as a pre-filter. So there might be cases where a pre-filter can help you out by filtering out the massive amount of data that you want to ignore and narrow that down to something that Hub can then do some more granular filtering on. So we had a couple 100,000 of closed defects in Micro Focus ALM. I didn't even want it to bother parsing through all that. I didn't want it to take the time, pre-filter all that out, and then Hub does more of a granular filter. Do I have a timer? Or, I don't know, I thought we had a timer, but, oh, okay. Let me know if I'm going too long, because sometimes I kind of ramble. Models. So this was another item that when I moved from Sync to Hub, when I first started getting into Hub, I thought, okay, I'm not too sure about models. I wasn't really sold on the concept of a model. With Sync, I was used to taking one endpoint tool and another endpoint tool, and I just linked those fields together, right? Fairly simple approach. With Hub, you've got a model that sits in the middle. And in the model, you define your fields. And then you link endpoint fields to the model. You link the other endpoint fields to the model. Well, when I was just setting up my first integration, that seemed like a little extra layer of abstraction that I didn't see any benefit to and seemed like it was taking me longer. So what's the point? I was a little frustrated with the whole model concept. But once I learned how models are supposed to be and how they're this universal adapter approach. So you take like a defect model and you define what a defect means to your organization, and you identify the fields that are important for a defect in your organization. Maybe they're fields that you do enterprise reporting on, for instance. This is what makes a defect. And then you can take any tool in your organization. I know we've got multiple tools that do defects. You can take any tool in your organization that does a defect, and you can connect those up to the model. And it's much easier, much quicker, much simpler. Once you've defined that, you've kind of done that initial groundwork, you can bring these other tools in, you can connect them right up to the model, and it's quick and easy. And they do things with smart fields that even automatically do some mapping, which is really cool. Scripting is another area that they improved quite a bit on with Hub. Now, scripting this allows you to do your own programmatic statements. So Sync and Hub, they did a great job of covering a lot of the basics when you're mapping a field and to another field and you're trying to transform that data from field to field. It does a lot of things, a lot of that work for you, but sometimes you need to do something a little extra, right? You might need to add something to the field, or you might need to look up some information, or you might need to do some conditionals. If this, then I want it to equate to this, otherwise. And if you get a little complicated, then scripting allows you to do that. With Tasktop Sync, the scripting was in a language called Groovy, whereas in Hub, it's in JavaScript, which that was a big plus right there. JavaScript, I think, in general, has a lot more familiarity with people, at least it did with me. Not that Groovy was hard, but JavaScript has a little more familiarity, a little easier to use. And the other thing I like is something that Jeff mentioned, where you can call web services now. That is huge, because isn't it? That's a game changer. Because even with the extensions, you can do quite a bit there, but you can't do everything. So now that you can call a web service, yeah, now you can really go crazy, and you can do all kinds of things with your scripting. And the scripting, it actually can simplify your code a lot. So this is one of the integrations that I took from Sync to Hub. This is a script that I rewrote from Sync into Hub, and you can see the difference right there with the amount of code. Because Hub looks up field of values and things like that, and it does all that transformation for you. You don't have to go do it like you did in Sync. So in some cases, you can cut your coding down quite a bit with Hub. So that was huge. And then, of course, that landscape, that integration landscape visual, you know, how I saw that last year, and it's like, oh, wow. You know, who doesn't want to go plug their endpoints in there and plug their artifacts and have this nice automatic little picture pop up that shows that mapping and the flow between the artifacts and between your, the flow of the artifacts between your models. You know, that was cool. I had to go back and plug those in to see that. So those are some of the whys, a few of the steps that we do and this is, yeah, some of the steps that we take. And a lot of these, steps 1 through 7, they're kind of no-brainers. They're real basic. You know, you take your requirements that you had from Sync, and you've got to set up your Hub repositories, and again, maybe define your model, or maybe you already have a model and you can reuse that. Your collections, you'll need to rewrite your scripts, okay, from a different language into Hub as Hub extensions, and that can take a little bit of time. That's one of the areas that might take a little more time than usual. Create your integration, redo your endpoint filters. So you want to take those Tasktop Sync filters that you had in your tool, and you want to rebuild it as a Hub integration filter. But then the last step is, you might think, well, we're done, but this is probably the one that's the most complicated. And that's, what do you do with all that data? If you've got a Tasktop Sync integration that you've been using all this time, and you want to move that to Hub, and you've got all this data in your endpoint that you've been syncing, well, when you move from Sync to Hub, it doesn't automatically reuse that connection information. So what do you do with all these artifacts? So I threw down, kind of thought of 5 different steps, and actually we've only done 2 of these, so the other ones are just things that I thought of we could have done if we needed to. But here's some ways that you can approach that data that you might need to reuse. The first one is the one that actually ended up working out for us just because our several endpoint tools retired, right? So with our ALM RTC went away, we moved to Jira. It was real easy to set up a new integration on Hub and then recreate all the artifacts that we were syncing into RTC. You could just have Hub pull all those artifacts from ALM right into Jira, and everything continues. So I guess you could say we got kind of lucky with that. You don't necessarily have the option to go rip out tools and plug in tools just for this, but the timing aligned just perfectly for us, which was great. You might want to run Sync and Hub in parallel. So you might want to change your sync so that it only syncs the existing ones that it's been syncing until those artifacts come to a natural conclusion and close out, and then have Hub do all the new ones, and then once the old artifacts close out, retire your sync, and then everything would be on Hub. It's another idea. You can recreate your open artifacts in Hub, maybe delete those old ones that you were syncing, maybe you don't need them anymore, and just work with them from Hub, or you can just ignore them as perhaps. That's what we're going to do with another one. We've got an integration that between ServiceNow and ALM, and it really doesn't do much updating, so I said we're just going to leave those old ones there will create the new ones. They were perfectly fine with that, so that worked great. And then the last one is one that we haven't had an opportunity, although with our last one, our last sync that I still need to move, we might actually have to do this. I have to dig into a little deeper. But you can engage Tasktop support. So if you need to maintain those existing artifacts that you've been syncing, you need to maintain those with your new hub integration. Tasktop support can take that connection information and they can port that over to hub. Now, I understand that there's some time involved with that, so definitely you'd want to engage them very early on in your process, especially if you've got a large number of artifacts, because there is some manual effort and some work that needs to take place in order to do that. So, but that is another great option. With extensions, just a few tips, a few things, and most of these kind of center on, again, that web service notion that once I saw that was great. You can call a web service from a person reconciliation. So a person reconciliation is a special type of hub extension that lets you do some programmatic conversion of users and user names. You can't really do a whole lot in those, but I did find that you can call a web service. So once I found that out, then, okay, now I can do some extra, I can go call Jira for some extra information if needed, and some of that. So I do that in one of my hub extensions. Additional fields, so a transformation script is something, if you're using a tool like Jira, where status values transition from a value to another, and there's typically a code that has to be used on an API call to do that transition. Tasktop support can give you a transition script, which, and in some cases with your Jira, when you transition from one value to another, you might need to, a field might become required, and you can code that in the transition script, but we ran into a case where we had some more conditionals on that. We maybe had a couple of fields, and so you can go down into that section that says do not modify. Sometimes you have to go down in that section and you have to modify it a little bit. So don't be afraid. I do it all the time. You can call other tool APIs. So this was huge too. That, and along with the other one, the Jira plugin support. Tasktop Hub supports a few Jira plugins, but as you know, there's like 50 million of them out there. And if your organization is using a plugin and you really need your integration to rely on information from that plugin, then there's a good chance that Hub won't support it out of the box. But you can call a web service, and you can call other tool APIs. So you can make Jira calls. We make ALM API calls. We make Jira calls. We were going to make some ServiceNow API calls, but we didn't need that. You can call all those. You can call Jira plugins APIs. So all of that. I got 4 minutes left. An environment web service. So one thing that I like to do when I move my integrations from test to a UAT environment to a production environment, then you have to move your extensions, right? And if you hard-coded your testing URL in your extension to call it your test web service so you could test it, well, then you got to remember to go out and change that to each environment URL as you go up the chain. I call a generic web service that just makes a little call to localhost. This calls a little web service on localhost that reads a local file on that server that returns the URL of the API set that I want to use. So that way it's environment independent. Pushing constants back to source. You can create constants from source to target. It's not so easy to go target back to source, but you can with an extension. Source control tool is another thing. I'm like an Eclipse junkie, so I do everything in Eclipse, even non-code things I do in Eclipse just because I like it so much. I always put my extensions in Eclipse and then I copy them into Hub. That way I've got all my editor functionality, I've got source control, I've got version control, I've got version history. If I mess something up, I can go back and say, oh, what the heck did I do, kind of thing. So that's a great way. And then sharing extensions. I still think it would be really neat if we could have some mechanism that customers could share what they've done. So, and even like a library that you could search, and you could go out and say, hey, I need something on this, and put some keywords in, and get an extension and to help you with that. The Hub Error API is another thing. When we first started using Hub, you couldn't send emails on errors. It wasn't even supported at the time. I know they've added that since, but fortunately they had an API that you could call and you could get that error information. So that was actually, for us, what was a disappointment at first turned into, wow, this is a really great opportunity. Now that I'm reading the errors programmatically, I wrote a Java program that goes out every 5 minutes, hits that hub error API, pulls in those errors. Now it can do much more granular emails. So I can send emails to different areas by different error, so that not just us gets it, but the actual business area. So they go, oh yeah, this is a data error on our part, we need to go fix that. It can even fix errors, right? So I've got some examples where in ALM, if it's a bad data error, I can make an API call that goes and fixes the error, and that gets that all set up. So lots of things that you can do there. Automated testing of integration. So this is another area where with Hub, we're picking up new updates at least quarterly, sometimes more because we're picking up fixes. And with each update, I like to really do a base level of testing on all of our integrations. And it takes a fair amount of time, especially as we add more and more integrations. So I said, well, we really should look at doing some automated testing on some base test cases of our integrations to make sure everything works in our test environment after we upgrade. So we had a guy on our team with some UFT experience, and he's been doing a little bit of that. He set up some UFT tests in a couple of cases. And you know, with any kind of testing like that, you can do it. But I think it would be interesting. I know that Tasktop does lots, they do thousands of API tests every night. So they've got obviously facilities that do that. If they could create something that customers could take advantage of. So we could make API calls on one end and then verify on the other endpoint, those API calls, the results of that sync through API calls are successful. I think that would be great. So yeah, I'm out of time. So that was my topic. If you want to talk about any items that I talked about or just anything in general, hit me up. I'll be around after. I'll be there tonight. And I got my contact information. So thank you.